Hello and welcome to Yesterday's Airlines. Today's video is all about Ilyushin Il-62s, codenamed the Classic by NATO. And the Il-62 is very much Russia's first long-range jet airliner. And the reason we're talking about the Il-62 is because Phoenix have started to release their very first Il-62s on their all brand new molds, which you can see one of them here up on the stand, surrounded by a selection of Gemini jets, Il-62. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the Il-62 in 400 scale, look at some of the older releases, and get a closer look at that lovely new Phoenix Classic as well. Before we get on to do that, however, as always, I really appreciate people that subscribe to the channel, so chuck a like on the video if you're enjoying the content, and please do subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Obviously, I've also got yesterdaysairlines.com, the website, and I'd be remiss not to mention that for those that still value the written word, I have undertaken a full mold review of Il-62s at the site just over the past few days. So got a lot of information there about the Il-62 in 400 scale, including images of the mold that I don't have in my collection from ADP Model. So check that out as well. And also check out my sponsor for this video, Northeast Diecast. Northeast have got a fabulous selection of 400 and 200 scale airliners at their website, and there's always something new being added from a collection that Matthews acquired. So there's a ton of really new and interesting models at the site all the time, and it's well worth checking those out because there are some really great deals to be had there. And when you do check them out, don't forget to use the code Yesterday's Airlines 15 for 15% off your order at Northeast Diecast. That's Yesterday's Airlines 15 for 15% off your order at the website. But let's get on and check out the Il-62 in 400 scale. Until this year, the only source of Il-62s, aside from that single model made by ADP Model, has been Gemini Jets, who have had a Il-62 mold since at least 2006. And this mold has gone through some modifications, so there are effectively two kind of different variants of it, all using the same base fuselage. And you can see I've got quite a few in my collection from the pictures here. So what we're going to do first is take a look at some of these Il-62s that have been made by Gemini, which overall has been a really nice mold. This pair here are two of the older releases, and you can see that overall it looks like a pretty solid and nice Il-62 mold. Obviously, it's showing its age a little bit nowadays, being dated from 2006, but for its time it was a really good mold. And even now I still think it's a pretty solid mold. Obviously, given its age, it is a cradle fit mold, so there is a seam around that wing region, which you could see there, but it's fairly subtle, and when you look from the top you don't really get a clear view of that seam. From the underside it's more obvious, but it's not a big issue. This is an Il-62M variant with the engines that go with that, and we'll talk a little bit about the different variants of Il-62 later on. One of the things that these early Il-62s did have was not always the best cockpit printing, and you can see here on this rather nice Aeroflot release, the cockpit windows are not great. It also has quite a high nose gear, some of these earliest Il-62s from Gemini. One of the most well-known features of the Il-62 is the infamous tail prop that the aircraft needed to not topple onto its rear. And you can see that with these early Gemini models, that feature is molded in. You've got a component you can take out to have the gear deployed, and as you can see on the Aeroflot to the left, you've got a gear up version of it as well. It's a little chunky in these very early variants of the 62 that Gemini made. If we switch over to a much later release from Gemini, and this Tarom version is from 2019, you can see that it's got a new set of landing gear, slightly more detailed and obviously rolling nowadays. The base mold is broadly the same, and there's still some good detailing. You can also see that the tail prop has been modified and is now a lot smaller. Moving to the front, you can see that the cockpit window print has been quite dramatically changed. It's smaller, it's nicer. It's a better fit for the aircraft than the earlier version. And you can see the difference between the landing gear on those earlier IL-62s and on these later ones with the rolling gear. The only thing I would say now is that the gear still does not have the very small nose gear doors on it that it ought to. Moving to the back, you can see very clearly the difference in size of the wheel being used for the tail prop. It is now much, much smaller than it used to be. And to be honest, I'm not sure that is necessarily a big benefit. If you look at the tail prop when it's deployed, it becomes even more obvious that the tail prop size has been decreased dramatically. This Interflug release is from 2021, so this is one of the very most recent releases. It's actually a very nice model, and I did review this at the site, but you can see the tail prop leg here now. Even though the prop leg itself is a lot nicer and smaller and more detailed, the tyre is still tiny. And in fact, I have to attach these with blue tack because even though they modified the size of the leg, they didn't change the size of the hole it fits into, and it just falls out all the time. And you can see that when you compare it to the older style, the leg is a lot smaller, it's a lot nicer, but I do think that that tyre is too small, and it really would be nice if it actually fitted in the hole and stayed there without the use of blue tack, which it does not. So pluses and minuses there, I think, when you're looking at the changes that have been made to the IL-62 mould by Gemini. But broadly, Gemini's mould is very nice, and I think that it is a really solid and decent IL-62, especially considering the overall age of the mould. I've got, quite a few of these in my collection, and I do like them. The new competition to that venerable Gemini mould comes from Phoenix Models, who have now started releasing IL-62s on two brand new molds, one representing the IL-62 Basic and one representing the IL-62M. As you can see here, I have already reviewed the IL-62 Basic at yesterdaysairlines.com, so check out that written review at the website. But what we're going to do now is take a closer look at the new Phoenix release and see how it compares to the Gemini. Now, before we do that, it's worth mentioning the difference between the versions. The IL-62 Basic has Kuznetsov NK8 engines, which have internal cascade thrust reversers, as you can see on the left, whereas the IL-62M has these Soloviev D30 engines, which have clamshell thrust reversers, as you can see on the right. And that is the primary difference when you are looking at an IL-62 Basic and an IL-62M, the later version. So here is the first release by Phoenix Models of an IL-62. It is a Basic, and it is in the Aeroflot delivery colours. And as you can see, it is a really attractive model. I think that Phoenix has done a superb job with this new IL-62, and I do think that in many ways it is a better version than the Gemini. Looking at the front of the aircraft, for example, I think that Phoenix have captured the unusual dolphin-y style nose, quite similar to a TriStar, that the 62 has really well. And you can see, as I just pointed out, that they've also got those very small undercarriage doors visible on the nose gear. And when you compare the two noses together, you can see that the IL-62 for Gemini is a little bit chunkier, not quite as well defined, and obviously even the updated gear is lacking those little gear doors. So even though I do like the Gemini version, I think that the nose on the Phoenix is better. Being a modern mold, it obviously also is a slot in wings casting, and therefore you do not have any form of seam line. So even when you come underneath, the fuselage has no cuts in it, and that enables a better level of detailing and a better sculpting on the underside of the aircraft, which I think looks really very nice. As you can see, even though the Gemini does have a lot of detail here, it's not looking as good as the Phoenix because you've got those two lines cutting across, and it does have an impact on what is possible. So I think that both at the nose and in this underbody area where the seam is, the Phoenix is coming out on top. I will also say that the main gear doors on the Phoenix are better sculpted. They slant outwards at the correct angle, whereas those on the Gemini don't quite, which gives the Gemini actually quite a high feel and will talk a bit about that later in the vid. At the rear, you can see we've got the Kuznetsov engines with the Cascade thrust reversers, and they're looking really nice. And I do think that this tail region is nigh on perfect, and I really am also liking the size of the tyre for the tail prop. And again, we'll have another look at that in a second. But broadly, I can't really see anything which is really wrong with this, and you can see there's some nice print detailing here on top of the engines and on the underside to show off those Cascade thrust reversers for those Kuznetsov engines. So it's looking really good. And if you compare the back end of the Gemini version, you can see the difference in the engines, because the Gemini is a 62M and that has the clamshell thrust reversers. So they're not incorrect on the Gemini, just a different variant of the model. And Phoenix does have a 62M, I just don't own it quite yet. So really looking very good. So let's take a look in more detail at the tail prop. As with the Gemini, you get two parts which can be interchanged. As you can see, currently I've got the gear up version, and it just pulls out very easily, and you can see that it's a tiny piece, so it is unfortunately rather easy to misplace, and you can see how small it is, but it does have a little stalk on it, if I can get it to focus, which you insert in, and it sits very nicely and tightly in place. The gear down prop leg similarly has some really nice detailing on it, and I think the tyre here is much better sized than on the Gemini, and nicely that little top portion slots very well into the hole on the aircraft, so you don't have the same issues with it falling out that you do on the Gemini. And here we go, you can see you just push it in, get the right around with the tyre towards the rear. There we go, push it in and it fits in very nicely and stays in. So that's looking really good, and I think that the downtail prop version of this adds some really nice detail to the model, and especially if you're going to display this at the gate on your model airport, then you really are going to have that tail prop down. So looking really good, and I like the engineering that they've put into making that. However, it isn't 110% perfect, because I've noticed that when you have the aircraft on the ground with the tail prop down, then the prop is a little bit long and the aircraft doesn't sit so well on its main gear tyres, as you can just about see here, and it makes it a little bit wobbly if you want to. So I think the Phoenix could perhaps modify the length of that slightly, but broadly it works well. Now, comparing the Phoenix to the Gemini once more, one of the things I noticed is how incredibly tall the Gemini version is at the rear. And I do think the Phoenix here is more accurate in that it has the tail down stance as opposed to a tail up stance that the Gemini has. And so in this case, I think it's another spot where the Phoenix mold is better than the Gemini, has a more accurate stance to the overall aircraft, and yeah, the Gemini is just too high at the rear, in my opinion. But that's a look at the Phoenix model. Let's get her up on to the turntable so you can get a better look at her now. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to the Ilyushin IL-62 in 400 scale, both the older Gemini Jets mold and the brand new Phoenix edition. Now, Phoenix have announced 9 models so far, and 2 have got to market. There are some really good looking models on their way, and I've got several on order. If you don't have any IL-62s in your collection to date, then I strongly suggest getting some. It's a really interesting and unusual looking airliner, certainly much more interesting than modern Airbuses and Boeings in my opinion, and it had some great liveries on it as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Phoenix can do in the near future with their brand new mold, and I think there's going to be some awesome releases. Hopefully airlines like TAAG Angola, Egypt Air, CSA, Tarom. There's so many good schemes that you can put on IL-62, and I'm really looking forward to seeing those. So I'm really excited by these Phoenix IL-62s. I think it's a great looking mold, and I hope you guys agree. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time. Gemini Jets have just announced their September releases, so I think that'll probably be the next vid on the horizon. But until then, it's goodbye from yesterday's airlines. Goodbye.